Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and in Mirz Hashem, we will be learning today Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Netilas Yadayim. We pick up today Siman Kuf Nun Ches Sif Yud on Mem Zayin Amud Beis, 3 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, in the middle of the line. Says the Mechaber, Afal Pi Sheshiuram B'Revius. Even though, on a technical level, the shear, the amount of water that you need to wash both hands is 1 revius. That's the minimum shear. The minimum shear of water that you could have for washing both hands is 1 revius. Pirush, says the Rama, revius halug. Revius means a quarter. A quarter of what? A quarter of a lug. Dahainu shear beitza v'chetzi. This is the amount of water that would be displaced by 1.5 eggs. Even though that's the shear, says the Mechaber, Yosef litoil b'shefa. We should add on water, and we should wash with a plentiful amount of water. The Amar of Chisda, because we find that Rav Chisda said, Ana meshoy maloi chafnei maya. I washed my hands with handfuls of water, plenty of water. V'yahavoli maloi chafnei tivusa. And I was given min hashamayim handfuls and handfuls and handfuls of tova, of bracha. So you see that Rav Chisda said, for washing with a plentiful amount of water, I received min hashamayim a plentiful amount of bracha. Therefore, says the Mechaber, yes, the minimum share is a revius, but add on water and you'll receive a lot of bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Zayin, Sheshiuram B'Revius. What does this mean that their share, shiuram, is a lashon rabim, shiuram, their share. What does that mean, their share? Hainu revius achas l'shtei yodav. It means that for both hands, the minimum share is 1 revius to wash 2 hands. Ulakaban b'siman kuf samach beis siv dalid ha'atakti divrei achronim. The Chofetz Chaim says that later on in Siman kuf samach beis, where we're going to really start to discuss the technical details of exactly how to wash Netilas Yadayim, how much water, exactly what the proper procedure for washing Netilas Yadayim is. The Mishnah Berurah says that over there, I bring down the words of the Achronim, Shekasvu, who write, T'lo yivchais b'revius l'chol yad v'yad, that you should not use less than 1 revius for 1 hand. Each hand should get is a separate revius. De'benoitel b'pachus, because when you wash with less than a revius, tzarech lizar b'harbe dvarim, then we come up with a lot of halachic details that we have to be careful with. Ve'ein hakoil b'kiyin behem, and not everybody understands and is knowledgeable of these details. Therefore, let's avoid them and make sure you wash each hand with the revius. And this is a discussion that we'll get into in Kuf Samach Beis. But for now, what we need to know is that the Mechaber makes the statement that the minimum amount of water you could use for Netilas Yadayim is 1 revius for both hands. Says the Mishnah Berurah that you're going to see later on, we should use a revius for each hand. And the Mechaber brought down the Gemara where Rav Chisda said that he washed with a plentiful amount of water and he received a plentiful amount of bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Ches, Maloi chafnei tivusa, he received handfuls of tova. Says the Chofetz Chaim, Mikamakim, nevertheless, despite the fact that you see over here a Maimer Chazal, where Rav Chisda said, wash with a lot of water, because I washed with a lot of water and I got a lot of bracha. Says the Chofetz Chaim, Mikamakim, nevertheless, lechatchila toiv yoser, lechatchila, it would be much better, shelo yaseh b'shvil zeh, that you should not wash with a lot of water in order to get a lot of schar. Tehu almanas lekabel pras, because that would be doing a mitzvah, going the extra mile in order to receive a pras, in order to receive a present, in order to receive a tip, min hashamayim. And we know that the Mishnah in Avos tells us that a person should not serve the Rabbanu Shalom almanas lekabel pras. he should serve the Rabbeinu Shalom Shalayam Manas L'Kala Pras. The person should serve the Rabbeinu Shalom not out of an expectation of receiving a reward, not in order so that he should receive a reward. We're supposed to serve the Rabbeinu Shalom Me'ava. We're supposed to have a recognition of all the beneficence that the Rabbeinu Shalom bestows upon us, and we're supposed to have hakaras hatoiv, and we're supposed to have ava, we're supposed to have love for the Rabbeinu Shalom that drives us to serve him, not because we want to receive reward. The reward is Seifei Lava. The Rabbeinu Shalom does not withhold reward. The Rabbeinu Shalom gives reward. That we know. But we shouldn't be doing the avodah in order to get the reward. So don't go now and wash the Netilas Yadayim with a lot of water because, I found a new way to receive reward. Do it because you found out that that's the proper thing to do. We should do the avodah l'chvayid the Rabbeinu Shalom, and the schar will come. Chavetz Chaim says an interesting thing. Somebody who is careful to wash with a plentiful amount of water, and he sees that he doesn't become rich, he should know it's because there are other things that he did that were improper, and that is preventing him min hashamayim from becoming wealthy. In other words, really the Chavetz Chaim is telling you, we see over here from Rav Chisda, that this is cause and effect. If you make sure to wash the Netilas Yadayim ala pas, always with a plentiful amount of water, then min hashamayim, they're going to give you maloi chafnei tivusa. They're going to give you a tremendous amount of schar. Somebody sees he's not getting the ashirus, he's not becoming wealthy. That must be because there are other maisim that you have that are preventing you. It's preventing the berachah from coming onto you and preventing you from becoming wealthy. Okay. Says the Mechaber, Sif Yod Aleph, bottom line, Mem Zayin Mem Beis. We have an interesting question. When precisely should you make the bracha on the Netilas Yadayim? We know that the golden rule in Berachas HaMitzvahs is that we make a bracha over la'asiyasan. We make a bracha before we perform the mitzvah. So, here's Hashem Rosh Hashanah, second day Rosh Hashanah this year. We have a mitzvah of shofar. We're going to make the bracha of Lishmaya Kol Shofar before the Baal Tekeh blows shofar. On Sukkot, when we have lulav and esrig, so what do? We take the lulav with the hadassim and the aravas, we take the esrig upside down, so that we're not yet being mekayim the mitzvah. We make the bracha of al netilas lulav, and then we turn the esrog the right side up, so we should now be mekayim the mitzvah. But we make the bracha before we perform the mitzvah. When we put on tefillin, we put the tefillin in place, and we don't tighten it. First we make the bracha, then we tighten it. So the bracha is always before the performance of the mitzvah. Now, it's supposed to be before the performance of the mitzvah, but as close to the performance of the mitzvah as possible. So now let's apply that to the Netilas Yadayim. Netilas Yadayim, I would think what you should do is, you should go to the sink, you should fill up the keli, and then when you're about to pour the water over your hands, you should make a bracha, Asher Kedushanim Mitzvaysav Tzivanu al Netilas Yadayim, and then perform the mitzvah of the Netilas Yadayim and pour. Yet, that's not what we do. We know that really what we do, our minig is, we wash our hands, and then before we dry our hands, we make a bracha of al Netilas Yadayim. Why is that? Why don't we make the bracha kaidem la'asiyasan? Why don't we make the bracha right before we wash? That's the question that the Mechaber is coming to address over here in Sif Yod Aleph. Now, Sif Yod Aleph has a lot of complications in it, because going into Sif Yod Aleph, the Mechaber is kind of assuming that we know the background of a lot of different complications in the procedure of the Netilas Yadayim that we're really not going to see until Kosam Beis, Kosam Gimel. Now, I'm not going to get into all of those details. We'll just touch upon them so that we have an understanding of what the Mechaber says here. Says the Mechaber, Mivarech kaidem netila. Really, we should wash Netilas, we should make the bracha of al Netilas Yadayim before the Netilas Yadayim. Right? Says the Mechaber, Shekal HaMitzvahs mevarach aleim over la'asiyasan. Because we always make a bracha over la'asiyasan. We always make a berachas HaMitzvahs before we are mekayim the mitzvah. Now, some of you might be wondering, we have this lashon of over la'asiyasan, which I'm translating as before we perform the mitzvah. To some of you, over la'asiyasan sounds a little bit like after we perform the mitzvah. You go to a matzah bakery and they're running the clock and they're timing 18 minutes for the shift. When the matzah is too late, they yell, over. It sounds like it's over, right? It's past. So over la'asiyasan, to some people, might sound like that means after the performance of the mitzvah. But it doesn't mean that. Over la'asiyasan means before the performance of the mitzvah. The Gemara in Pesachim talks about this. The Gemara in Pesachim at Daf Zayin, I believe it is, Daf Zayin brings down different rayas from Psukim that over la'asiyasan means before. One of them is by Yaakov Avinu with Parshas Peshalach. By Yaakov Avinu, it says that he went to greet Esav. He went in front of his wives and his children. So it says over there, V'hu avar lifneihem. He went before them. So the Gemara in Pesachim brings a raya, V'hu avar, means that he was in front of them. The Gemara brings other rayas as well. But in any case, says the Mechaber again, Mivarich kaidem netila, really we have to make the bracha before Netilas Yadayim, shekala mitzvahs mivarich aleim over la'asiyasan, because that's the golden rule in berachas mitzvahs. We always make a bracha over la'asiyasan before we perform the mitzvah. V'noagu, however, he says, and he brings this down from Taisus and Brachas, V'noagu shaloi levarach adachar netila. However, the minig is that we don't make the bracha until after we actually wash the hands. Why is that? The Mechaber gives a very, very solid logical reason. Mishum de pa'amim she'en yodav nikiyos. Let's remember, we're starting out over here with stam yodayim. Stam yodayim are shniyos l'tova. What are stam yodayim? Stam yodayim are unwashed hands. We don't know the status of these hands. We don't know that we touched anything metunif. We don't know that we touched an uncovered part of the body. We don't know that we touched something that renders our hands unclean. So they're not unclean hands. They're not yodayim mitunafos. They're not unclean hands. But they're not yodayim nikiyos either. They're not necessarily clean hands. We didn't just wash them. Instead, they're stam yodayim. Says the Mechaber, when you talk about stam yodayim, so says the Mechaber, mishum de pa'amim she'en yodav nikiyos. There are times that your hands are unclean. Let's back up. Mishum de pa'amim she'en yodav nikiyos. Says the Mechaber, there are going to be times that you're going to wash for the netilas yadayim ala pas when your hands are unclean. And now what? You can't make a bracha. You can't be Maitzi Shem Shamayim with unclean hands. So we can't say that what you should do is, when you wash the Netilas Yadayim ala pas, you should first make the bracha Shekid Yishanim V'Tzivanu al Netilas Yadayim and then wash, because maybe your hands are unclean. Let's give an example. Let's say you come into the house and it's time for lunch, but before you sit down to eat lunch, you need the Beis HaKisei. So you go use the Beis HaKisei. Now you have Yodayim Metunafos. Now you have unclean hands, right? So what are we going to tell you to do? We're going to tell you, when you wash the Netilas Yadayim ala pas, you have to make the bracha first. But I can't make the bracha because my hands are unclean. So what are you going to do? Wash? So then you're washing before the bracha. What are you going to do? Wash in order to make the bracha, in order to wash? Then we're going to run into the problem that if you wash your hands, even if you're not washing it for eating purposes, you can't make a bracha on the washing because you already washed your hands already. So what are we going to do? What's the answer over here? So the Mechaber says, I'll tell you what the answer is. Since the fact is that many times when you go to wash the Netilas Yadayim ala pas, the starting position of your hands is that they're Yadayim mitunafos, and therefore you can't make a bracha right now. So therefore, says the Mechaber, what should you do? Says the Mechaber, the second line of Memches Amud Aleph, umipnei kach, because of this problem, because very often the starting status of your hands are going to be that they're not stab yadayim, they're yadayim tunafos, umipnei kach, mivarchen aleihem, you should make the bracha on netilas yadayim, achar sheshifshef yadav, after you rub your hands, shekvar yadav nikiyos, when your hands are already clean, koidem sheyatel aleihem mayim shniyim, before you pour the second water on your hands. What's the Mechaber saying? Let's take this from 30,000 feet, and we'll see the details more in Siman Kuf Samach Beis, Siman Kuf Samach Gimel. The procedure that is going to be described to us later on between the Mechaber and the Ramah, and we'll get to our minig, we'll get to all that in Kuf Samach Beis, Kuf Samach Gimel, but the procedure that's going to be described to us is that we take water and we wash our hands once with water. So now we're pouring water on our hands, and one of the primary reasons that we're pouring that first water onto our hands is simply to cleanse our hands of anything that might be a chatzitza, anything that might interpose between the washing, between the water of the Netilas Yadayim and our hands. So if our hands are dirty, if our hands have substantive dirt on them, you can't wash the Netilas Yadayim, you have a chatzitza, you have something interposing between the water and your hands. So you need to clean your hands. So we're going to hear later on that one method is you pour once on one hand, pour once on the other hand, and then you're mishafshef. Then you rub your hands. Then you wash for a second time. And that second time is the ikar mayim of tahara. That's really being matar your hands. Now, says the Mechaber over here, we have this issue of when you should make the bracha. Really, the golden rule of Ka'over Lasiyasan tells us that you should make the bracha before you start washing. But we have a problem because you might go into the washing procedure with your yadayim and tunafais, and therefore you're not able to make the bracha. Answers the Mechaber, the best thing to do is wash once, rub your hands together. Now your hands are already considered clean to the extent that you're allowed to make a bracha. Now make a bracha on the Netilas Yadayim, and now wash the second time. That's the Mechaber's Eitzah over here. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut lamites. Really, you're supposed to make a bracha over Lasiyasan before the performance of the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he defines the words over Lasiyasan, koidim, before, v'samuch, and as close as possible, leha'asiyah, to the performance of the mitzvah. And he brings this down from Rashi, Psachim Zayin Amud Beis, and as well as other places as well. So really, that's pushing us to make the bracha before we start Netilas Yadayim at all. But, says the Mechaber, we have a problem. But there are times that you're going to go to wash with yadayim and tunafais, with unclean hands. And if you have unclean hands, you can't make the bracha, because you're not allowed to make a bracha and be moisi shem shamayim with unclean hands. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut mem, the pa'amim shein yadav nikiyos, going, for example, sheyatza mi beis hakisei. If you just came out of the beis hakisei, or you just scratched yourself or touched a part of the body that's usually covered. So now you have your diamond tunafais. Now you can't make a bracha because you can't make a bracha before you wash your hands. Because of this, that's why the minig became that we cannot make the bracha over Lasiyasan, and instead we have to make the bracha after the Netila. But we don't want you to make the bracha mamish after the Netila, because we still want to try to be Mekayim over Lasiyasan as much as we can. So what do? Says the Mechaber, the Eitzah is wash the hands once, be mishavshef, rub the hands. Now you're already considered to have yodayim nikiyos in the context of being able to make the bracha of al netilas yadayim and being moitzi shem shamayim, and then you'll complete netilas yadayim ala pas with the second washing. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut memalf mayim shniyim habes Yosef hevi zayis b'shem Rabbeinu Yerucham shekasar shekei nago Rabbisav. The Beis Yosef brings down this eitzah in the name of the Rabbeinu Yerucham, who says that that's how his Rabbeinu were noig. Ubishibali leket hevi b'shem Rabbeinu Meir zal, but in the Shibali leket he brings down the sheet of Rabbeinu Meir shenag levarach achar hanetila, that says that the minig is that we wash after the complete Netilas Yadayim. We wash after we washed both of our hands twice. V'koydem haniguv, but before we dry our hands. Ukidul kamei, as is going to be explained shortly, v'chein nagu ha'olam, and that's the way the Welt is noyeg. The Welt is noyeg to complete the washing, and then before the drying, to make the bracha of al Netilas Yadayim. Let's see the Ramah. 3 lines down near the beginning of the line in the Shulchan Aruch says the Ramah, Haga, gam yochel levarech aleim kaidim niguv. Really, you can make the bracha after the washing is complete, before you dry your hands. Shegam haniguv min ha-mitzvah. Because the drying of the hands is part of the mitzvah of Netilas Yadayim. It's not pshat that the mitzvah of Netilas Yadayim ala pas is to pour water on your hands, and then it just happens to be you're going to go dry your hands because you don't want to sit down and eat with wet hands. No, the drying of the hands is part and is the completion of the mitzvah of al Netilas Yadayim. Shagam niguv min ha-mitzvah. And therefore, says the Ramah, umikre over lasiyasam. And if you make the bracha before you dry your hands, that is called over lasiyasam, because you're making the bracha before you complete the performance of the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut members. Shagam niguv, because the drying is also part of the mitzvah. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says something over here that I really had to, I had to look at this 5-6 times, and I still hope I'm chapping 100% what the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here. The easy way to learn the Mechaber and the Ramah, and the way I learned it when I simply learned the Mechaber and the Ramah, is that the Mechaber is trying to balance over lasiyasan together with the problem of yadayim and tunafais. So the eitzah that the Mechaber came up with is wash each hand once, do shifshuf, rub your hands to make sure that you get rid of any dirt of any kind. Now your hands are considered yadayim nikiyos in the context of the halacha that you're now allowed to be mitzi shem shamayim and you can make the bracha. So now make the bracha. Now complete the Netilas Yadayim with the second wash. Now make the bracha. And now complete the washing with the second washing. So now we've taken care of the problem of Yadayim and Tunafais with the first washing and the shifshuf. Now you made the bracha. And it's still over lasiyasan, because now you're going to complete the washing with the second pouring of the water, with the second washing. So that's how the Mechaber balanced over lasiyasan with the need to wash at least once in order to clean your hands so you can be mitzi shem shamayim and say the bracha. Comes along the Ramah, and it seemed to me that the Ramah says, I have another eitzah for you. There's another eitzah. Instead of doing what the Mechaber says, which is make the bracha of al Netilas Yadayim between the first washing and the second washing, I have another eitzah. The other eitzah is complete the washing, wash both hands twice with the shifshuf and everything else, and now make the bracha before you dry your hands. Because that's also called kaid over lasiyasam, because the drying is part of the mitzvah. That's the way I learned the Mechaber and the Ramah. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Kat Membez, no, that's not the way to learn the Ramah. When the Ramah says that there's another eitzah, which is go ahead and make the bracha before you dry your hands, he's not just saying that you don't have to do like the Mechaber. The Mechaber says make the bracha between the first washing and the second washing. Says the Ramah lav dafka, there's another way you could do it. You could make the bracha between the washing and the drying. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, that's not all he means. What he actually means is hu tam acher li'ichar bracha. The Ramah is giving a second reason why you should delay the making of the bracha. In other words, the first reason to delay the making of the bracha is because we have the problem of yadayim and tunafais. You can't make the bracha up front before you do the washing at all. You can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because you might have yadayim and tunafais. You might have unclean hands. Comes along the Ramah, and the Ramah says, no, there's another reason why you should delay the washing, the making of the bracha. Why? Because, and this is the way I'm understanding it, because if you make the bracha before the washing, you're making the bracha too early. You're not making the bracha over lasiyasan. Let's remember what the Mishnah Berurah said in Ois Kat Lamed Tes. In Ois Kat Lamed Tes, the Mishnah Berurah said that over lasiyasan does not only mean before the performance of the mitzvah. It means kaidim and samuch. It means before the performance of the mitzvah and as close as possible to the performance of the mitzvah. Mashal lamad davar. When you go ahead and you put on tefillin in the morning, and you're going to put on your shel yad, when do you make the bracha on the shel yad? Do you take the shel yad out of the bag and undo the ritzuas? Now say berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam v'sheked yisharim b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu lo niach tefillin. Then put the tefillin on your arm and tighten it? No. We learned in the Mishnah Berurah, we learned that you're bedafka not supposed to do that. Why? Because that's not samuch. That's not samuch la'asiyasan. That's not oiver la'asiyasan. That's not right before the performance of the mitzvah. That's what we call oiver la'oiver. That's 2 steps before performing the mitzvah. You're not even ready to perform the mitzvah. First, you have to put the actual tefillin on your arm. Only then are you ready to go tighten it. It's the tightening of the tefillin on the arm. That's the performance of the mitzvah of hanachas tefillin. So when do you make the bracha? You put the tefillin in position. You hold the ritzua so that you're ready to tighten it. Then you make the bracha, and right away you tighten the shel yad, and you're makayim the mitzvah. So you make the bracha over lasiyasan. You make it immediately before the performance of the mitzvah. Says the Ramah. What's the Mechaber saying? The Mechaber is saying that you should make the bracha between the first washing and the second washing. So what are you going to do? You're going to wash one hand, wash the other hand, be meshafshef. Then you're going to make a berachah sheked yisharim b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu on netilas yadayim. Now, the first thing you have to do is you have to wash each hand a second time, and you're still not yotzei the mitzvah. Because the niguv, the drying, is part of the mitzvah. Now you got to go pick up a towel, and now you got to go dry your hands with the towel and complete the mitzvah. Says the Ramah, that's over la'over. That's not over la'asiyasan. That's 2 steps removed. So says the Mishnah Berurah, when the Ramah says that you should not do the eitzah, when the Ramah says that there's another eitzah besides the eitzah of the Mechaber, he's not just telling you that the Mechaber is lav dafka. The Mechaber says that you should make the bracha between the first washing and the second washing, and that's called over lasiyasan. I have another eitzah for you. Don't make the bracha between the first washing and the second washing. Make the bracha between the second washing and the niguv, because that's also over lasiyasan. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. If you learn the Ramah that way, you misunderstood the Ramah. The Ramah is actually being chaylik, I think, on the Mechaber. What the Ramah is saying is, don't make the netilas yadayim between the first washing and the second washing. That's over la'over. Instead, because you still have to dry your hands, and drying your hands is part of the mitzvah. Instead, make the bracha after you complete the second washing, when you're ready to dry, when you're ready to complete the mitzvah. Then make the bracha of Asher Kedushanim B'Mitzvayis V'Tzivanu al Netilas Yadayim. So in the words of the Mishnah Berurah, what he actually says is, Hu tam acher le'ichar habracha. This is a separate reason why you have to delay the bracha. The first reason you have to delay the bracha is because you started out with your yadayim and 2 nafais, and you're not allowed to make a bracha because you're not allowed to be mitzi shem shamayim. But there's another reason that you have to delay the bracha, because if you don't, it's over la'over. So what you should do is you should make the bracha right before the drying. So hu tam acher lichar habracha, the gam acher netilah chashiv oid over lasiyasan. Because because even after the washing is complete, you still have an opportunity to wash and make it over lasiyasan. So if you do it earlier than that, it's over la'over. The gemara netilu haniguv, because the completion of the netilas yadayim is the drying of the hands. Ukidol kamei b'sif yud beis, like we're going to see shortly in sif yud beis. Ois cut mem gimel, and the Ramah said, and don't worry, making the bracha before the drying of the hands, umikre over lasiyasan, that is called over lasiyasan. Says the Mishnah Berurah, va'af b'shoifech revius babasachas, even if you pour a whole revius on each hand, Diladas ha'mechaber ein tzarech niguv klal, kidl kamei in Sif Yud Gimel. We're going to see later on in this Siman in Sif Yud Gimel that according to the mechaber, if you wash each hand with more than a revius, you're not required to dry your hands at all. See, we're understanding right now that the drying is an essential part of the Netilas Yadayim. But I'll give you a heads up on what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say that one of the reasons the drying is an essential part of the Netilas Yadayim is because let's analyze the Netilas Yadayim. Your hands are stam yadayim. Stam yadayim shniyos l'tumah. Midrabanan. They're tamei midrabanan. Stam yadayim. We have to remove the tumah. How do we remove the tumah? Normally you remove tumah by going to the mikveh. We're not going to the mikveh. This is tumah d'Rabbanan that's only on the hands. We don't need to go to the mikveh. What we have to do is we have to pour mayim on our hands from a keli. Okay, so we have tumah on our hands. We take a keli, we pour water on our hand. Okay, the water removes the tumah. But guess what? When the water removes the tumah comes off the hands, it goes on the water. The water is still on the hands. So now we have tamei water on our hands. How do we get rid of that tamei water? Oh, we wash a second time. So we wash one time, that takes the tumah off the hands, but the water is tamei. We wash a second time, that washes the tamei water off. But did the second washing get all the tamei water off? We're not sure. So what do? We take a towel and we dry our hands. Now there's no question there's no tamei water. That's essentially, we're going to get into the weeds of this later on. But essentially, that's the drill. Now, the mechaber is going to tell us later on that that's only true if you wash with less than a revius. If you wash with more than a revius, then an interesting halacha comes into play. If you wash with less than a revius, then we say the tumah comes off the hands, it goes into the water. But if you wash with more than a revius, then we say, poof, the tumah is gone. There's no tumah on your hands, there's no tumah in the water. At least ladas ha-mechaber. So the mechaber is going to say, if you wash with more than a revius, then essentially you don't need niguv. Essentially you don't need to dry your hands, because there's no worry that there might still be tamei water on your hands. So how does that jive with what we just said? We just said that you could make the berachah of netilas yadayim between the washing and the niguv, the drying, because the niguv, the drying is an essential part of the netilas yadayim. But wait a second, if you wash with more than a revius, then according to the mechaber, it's certainly not an essential part of the netilas yadayim, because you don't need it at all. If you wash with more than a revius, you don't need niguv. So this is what the Mishnah Berurah is addressing over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah again, Mem Gimel. Af b'shoifech revius babasachas, even if you pour an entire revius over the hands in one shot, the ladas ha-mechaber ein tzarech niguv klal. Then, according to the mechaber, you don't need niguv at all. Kidl kamei Sif Yud Gimel. Mikamakam loy plug. Still, there's a loy plug. The fact is that we established that the procedure of netilas yadayim includes niguv. Once the Chazal established that the procedure of netilas yadayim includes niguv, niguv is an essential part of the netilas yadayim, whether you need it technically or you don't need it technically, and therefore if you make the berachah before the niguv, it's considered over l'asiyasim. Okay, so fine. So far, again, just a quick recap of what we saw so far. We saw that there's a need to balance over l'asiyasan with the practical needs of netilas yadayim. The mechaber started off that, okay, the default position is we're going to perform a mitzvah, we have to make a berachah before we perform the mitzvah. So if the mitzvah is netilas yadayim, really it should be then we should take the keli and we should wash. But, says the mechaber, we can't do that. Why can't we do it? Practical problem. What's the practical problem? Often we come into netilas yadayim with yadayim tunafais, with unclean hands. If we have unclean hands, we can't make a berachah of netilas yadayim. We can't be ma'isi shem shamayim. So we're stuck. So says the mechaber, what do? Wash once, be meshafshif to get any dirt off your hands. Now you're allowed to be ma'isi shem shamayim. Now say Asher Kedushat b'sois v'tzivat al netilas yadayim. Now wash each hand a second time to complete Netilas Yadayim and dry your hands and you're good to go. Says the Ramah, no. Wash once, do shif, wash a second time, complete the Netila. Now make the berachah and do the niguv, and now dry your hands. Why? Because the drying is also an essential part of Netilas Yadayim. And adarabah, if you make the berachah on Netilas Yadayim before the second washing, you're over. You're not over lasiyasan, you're over lasiyasan. So the Ramah says, no, do it between the Netila and the drying. Now, says the Ramah, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down the middle of the line. Let's say you were distracted and you washed and you dried your hands and you didn't make the berachah. What do you do now? You completed the washing thoroughly. You did the drying also. What do you do now? Says the Ramah, you could still make a bracha. Make the bracha after you dry your hands. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hainu, he says, this is based on lefitam harisha in shekasav ha'mechaber. This is based on only worrying about the mechaber's reason to delay the bracha, when the mechaber said that the reason we don't make the bracha right away up front is because you have yadayim and two nafos. And what did the mechaber say? The mechaber said, essentially what the mechaber is really saying is that, did I miss a Mishnah Berurah before? No. Let's read the Mishnah Berurah inside, and we'll explain it as we go. Says the Chavetz Chaim Mem Dalet, V'hainu lefi tamarisha in shekasav ha'mechaber. When the Ramah says that b'di'evet, not l'chadchila, b'di'evet, if you forgot to make the bracha of Netilas Yadayim until after you dried your hands, you could still make the bracha. The Ramah is relying on the mechaber, and he's relying on what the mechaber said in the beginning of Sif Yod Aleph. The mechaber in the beginning of Sif Yod Aleph said, even though really we want you to make the bracha over lasiyasan, right? We can't tell you to make the bracha right away up front because you have a practical problem that you're starting out with yadayim and two nafos, or at least often you might be starting with yadayim and two nafos. Therefore, we're kind of compromising on over lasiyasan. And what we're doing is we're inserting the bracha between the first washing and the second washing, but we're not really being mekayim over lasiyasan. Because, and I mean, this is very clear in the mechaber. The mechaber said in Sif Yod Aleph, mivarich koidim netila, but v'nagu shaloi levarich hadachar netila. We're noyig not to wash it till after the netila. So realize, the mechaber is not saying that I'm being mekayim over lasiyasan by inserting the washing between the first netila and the second netila. He's trying to be mekayim over lasiyasan to a degree, but he's masking that that's not really over lasiyasan. The mechaber felt that really over lasiyasan would be before the beginning of the washing, but we can't really be mekayim over lasiyasan over here. Now, what excuse do we have not to be mekayim over lasiyasan? The excuse is because halacha demands that in this case we cannot be mekayim over lasiyasan because we have yadayim and nafos and we're not allowed to make a bracha. So says the Mishnah Berurah, when the Ramah says that b'di'evet, if you forgot to make the bracha on Netilas Yadayim until after you dried your hands, you could still make the bracha. What the Ramah is basing that on is this logic of the mechaber. The logic of the mechaber is that you could forego over lasiyasan if you were prevented from being mekayim over lasiyasan by the dictates of halacha. Since by the dictates of halacha you can't make the bracha because you have yadayim and two nafos, so now you don't have to be mekayim over lasiyasan. Therefore, says the Ramah, if you forgot to wash your hands until after you dried your hands, b'di'evet was still going to let you make a bracha. Why? Because we're going to go like the Mechaber, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, I wasn't able to make the bracha over Lasiyasan because the Mechaber in Sifyat Aleph, the Mechaber says I can't do over Lasiyasan because very often you start off with Yadayim and Tunafais. So I wasn't able to make the bracha cut over Lasiyasan, so now I'm going to make the bracha after the performance of the mitzvah. That's what we're relying on. Let's see it inside. V'hainu. Following the first reason to delay the bracha, which is that oftentimes we come to Netilas Yadayim al Pas with Yadayim and Tunafais, and following the logic of the Mechaber, where the Mechaber has said that I don't have to be overly concerned with over Lasiyasan. Why? Because halacha dictates that right now I can't make the bracha. And therefore this berachas hamitzvahs of al netilas yadayim is different than any other berachas hamitzvahs. The kaimalan she'im loy birach b'tchila shuvein mevarach achakach. Normally we say that if you went ahead and you listened to shofar before you made a bracha, it's too late, you can't make a bracha. If you picked up the lulav and esrog and shook the lulav and esrog with the esrog right side up, now you can't make a bracha anymore. You already became the mitzvah. But yet, over here, we don't say that. We don't say, hey, you can't go make a bracha anymore because you already washed your hands. No. Even according to the Mechaber, we let you wash your hands before making a bracha, and we let you make the bracha after you washed each hand one time. So why is this different? So explain. Normally we say, Hoyel v'yitchi yitchi. But the Shani Hacha, but over here, but Netilas Yadayim is different. Why? Because we weren't able to make the bracha earlier. Mitam halacha. Halacha disallowed us from making the bracha over Lasiyasan. Because many times our hands aren't clean and we can't make the bracha. And therefore, therefore, says the Ramah, that b'diavad, even if you already dried your hands, you could still use that argument, and you could say, I'm going to make the bracha now, even though it's after I completely was mekayim the mitzvah of the Netilas Yadayim. Why? Because the reason I couldn't do it earlier is because halacha told me I can't do over Lasiyasan my Netilas Yadayim. Because too often I start off with Yadayim and Tunafis. Aval, however, in kvar birach hamoitzi, let's say you washed and you already made hamoitzi on the pas, that now you can no longer make the bracha on Netilas Yadayim. The sheet of the Taz is, he's machmer, and he says once you dried your hands, even before the hamoitzi, you can no longer make the bracha. Even though lamaisa we don't paskin like the Taz, the rabu ha'achrayim shemaskibim im haramah, because most of the achrayim paskin like the Ramah and say that if you dried your hands but you didn't make hamoitzi yet, you could still make the bracha. Nevertheless, we should be extremely careful about this, and we should make sure to make the bracha on Netilas Yadayim before we dry our hands. Falkain, and therefore, Yesh Lizar, the Chavetz Chaim says we have to take great care. The minig that certain people have, where they say, Siyadaychem Kodesh, right? They wash their hands, and then they say, Siyadaychem Kodesh Ubaruch Hu Es Hashem. So now they're delaying, they're making a delay between the Netila and the Niguv. Now, if that delay is too long, the hands might dry off. So says the Chavetz Chaim, be very, very careful. Warn people who have this minig. Umamshichin hadavar. They say suyidechem kodesh mamish betazak havana. It takes them a long time to say suyidechem kodesh, and then maybe they're looking for paper towels. So you should warn them. Miloimer al netilas yadayim ad lachar niguv. Make sure that you don't end up delaying the bracha of al netilas yadayim until after your hands are already dry, because then shaloi kedin oisin kain. That would be shaloi kalacha. We have to be very careful to make the bracha of al netilas yadayim before we either dry our hands or our hands become dry. I was hoping we would finish the Siman today. Wasn't to be. We'll continue next time with Sif Yod Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Schos of limud HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs panos and shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS God Tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu amen. Be well.